Going live now. Right, that should be us live. We have Bronick back here
Live we
again.
are.
Yes, and today we were debating Stoicism. So I think the exact proposition I got was that you say Stoicism isn't about feeling nothing. It's rather about self mastery and happiness through the freedom gained by that. Would you say that's an
Yes,
accurate
that's pretty much my exact claim.
coolio? All right, so I would say my disagreement with that is that I think I would agree that the Stoics weren't completely consistent in this view, which I'm going to espouse here, because they were still Greeks and really second-rate philosophers at that. So they weren't consistent here. Oh, sorry, I thought something went on there. So basically, I think given the Stoic metaphysics, you have it that every human is merely a fragment of God. Epictetus's words were, "Man is a fragment torn from God," right? So every man is just a mere part, a mere organ of the world body, of the cosmic animal, it's sometimes called. So this is like a collectivism on this view, right? So yeah, they adopted the typical line of live in accordance with your nature. That was what all Greeks basically thought of ethics. But given your nature is to be a fragment, your reason as to what you should be doing with your nature, as to what it means to live in accordance with your nature, is very distinct from someone like Aristotle. So we basically have a duty ethic on this view. The reason for this is that everything is for the best. Everything is part of God's plan, and so it's your duty simply to obey as part of that plan. It's not up to you to, choose your own path in life. But in fact, you can't because they have determinism on their view as well. So it's kind of silly for you to even be concerning yourself with like outside problems or anything like that, which is why you have to achieve apathy. So this is central in one of their duties, which was acceptance. So you accept whatever happens to you without wanting to be different. Don't have passion for what you do not have. Don't feel anger or protest against the state of affairs you're in. Just take the course of events as it comes. And I have some arguments as to why this is a genuine Stoic duty, but I suppose I could let you respond to just the broad outline I've given here.
Okay, so my main points here are that what the Stoics describe as apathy is significantly different from what we consider in the modern English usage of the word apathy. Apatheia, the Greek word, means a meaning without, pathos, without suffering, without passion, right? So it is essentially a state where you are free from passions which make you suffer, right? It's about in the Stoic sense, it's about release from the in Stoicism, the idea is because we hold notions about external things which are not in our control, that are incorrect, we become disturbed. Typically, these notions are something like these things that are not in our control are in our control, and when we, as humans, see that violated before us, we become upset. That's the Stoic theory on. There's a psychological theory. And apathy is not the state of not caring about anything, not caring about things outside of you, being inactive, being inert. It is more a state of understanding the things outside you are not in your control, and focusing on what is in your control, which doesn't mean being entirely inactive, right? It means taking action with what you have. And that means, for instance, if you're a Stoic, and you believe your duty in the world is to protect people from violence, that's part of your actions. You will understand, though, that people outside of your control, people's bodies and lives are not inside your control, even if your actions are towards the end of saving people's lives. You will understand not everyone's life can be saved because it's not something that's under your control. So Stoic apathy in that sense is being able to control your emotion with regard to this. The other thing I would note is that I would say that Stoicism doesn't. You said earlier that it supposes a malevolent universe. I would say that it supposes an indifferent universe, a universe which does not. It could give you good things. It could give you bad things. It's a universe in which you have a part. You're right. You're right when they say the Stoics believe in determinism. They believe that the world is somewhat like a play that runs in cycles. This is obviously untrue, but it's not a malevolent world. It's a world where you have a role to bear. For example, this is from the Enchiridion, number 17. Remember that you are an actor in a drama of such kind as the author pleases to make it. If so, a short one. If short, of a short one. If long, of a long one. If it is a pleasure that you act as a poor man, a cripple, a governor, or a private person, see that you acted naturally. For this is your business. Act well the character assigned to you. To choose it is another's. So that's essentially a statement that your position in the world is not entirely under your control, right? You are going to be born somewhere. You're going to be subject to external circumstances which are not in your control. There are some things which are impossible for you. And that's true. So, and this does corroborate something you said earlier, where part of it, Stoicism is believing you should accept your role in the world. However, I would say that another part of it is it's not that you should just, wherever you're born and whatever station you're in is the one you should die in. It's that how should I put it? You shouldn't allow your belief that external circumstances coming to you invalidates your existence. It doesn't mean that if you are a poor man that your world is suddenly how should I put this? Not worth anything, not worth living. It has more to do with living an internally excellent life than an externally excellent life.
Sure. So I would say that is, insofar as the Stoics advocate for their ethics in order that you get tranquility and stuff like that, that is an inconsistency in their view. It's inconsistent with the fundamental metaphysics because they weren't able to properly carry out a duty ethics to its conclusion. I mean, even the Christians weren't able to do this. You don't get this until Kant. So they are sort of inconsistently saying, well, yes, and this will lead you to tranquility sometimes, you know. But on their metaphysics, why on earth should you be seeking tranquility, right? Because it's incoherent. You should just be doing your duty because you're just part of God's body. It's like that Epictetus. I think he was a slave. Yeah, so you're just a foot.
He was born
right?
a slave, yes.
Yeah, so a foot, sometimes it needs to step in thorns or be cut off. And that's his view of man. Like, some men are just feet, right? Sometimes they need to get dirty and be cut off to save, to promote everyone else, right? Everyone else is a bigger subset of God's body than one individual. So one individual doesn't really matter. So it doesn't, why on earth, the foot doesn't want tranquility, it isn't pursuing tranquility, it's just doing what it's got to do, right? And I would say, you said there that Stoicism about not concerning yourself with things which aren't in your control. Things which aren't in your control, if you think about them, if you focus on them, they make you disturb, so you should ignore them. And I would say yes.
I'll contest that.
Sure.
it's not about focusing on them. It's about believing. To precisely, it's about believing incorrect things regarding whether they are under your control or not. It's not focusing them. You can uh, focus greatly on them as long as you understand. As long as you don't presume that things which are hindered are free is what wording the Epictetus might use. Things that are not under your control are in your control. For example, if you were to think in your mind that your station in life, your reputation is something that's entirely under your control, then that will be incorrect because your reputation is part of the thoughts of other people, right? So you can't control the thoughts of other people. It's not under your control. That does not mean that it's worthless to act in a way to gain reputation. You can reasonably predict that certain actions will give you a reputation, and you might have virtuous reasons to seek out a reputation. Um, but in doing so, it's always important to keep in mind that reputation is not one of those things that you command directly. The things you command directly are your decisions. And talking about Stoic metaphysics, I'm not going to defend Stoic metaphysics here because I don't agree with them. I think you're right that Stoic metaphysics contains contradictions. It talks about God, which neither of us believe in God. Um, and I think that's probably the weakest point of Stoicism. But I think there's a lot of Stoic ethics which, without reference to this metaphysics, it's more. I think when I study Stoicism, I find that it has two halves. It has this sort of duty ethics side that you describe in this metaphysics, but then it has a sort of descriptive side, a side which doesn't really contain its own normative content, but it just describes how a human acts in the world and how happiness might be achieved this way. And it's not just me who thinks this way. It's modern psychological processes which are effective derive partly from Stoic reading. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And cognitive behavioral therapy is a reputable, like well understood scientific approach to psychological treatment. And the premise is that people are made upset by irrational thoughts about the world, by holding incorrect truths or incorrect facts to be true. So you might be depressed because you think your life is worth nothing, and the reason you think your life is worth nothing is because you failed to achieve what you wanted to achieve. And then the way we go about this is we deconstruct these notions, right? We deconstruct this incorrect notion that your life is worth nothing because you haven't achieved your desired test scores, and your father doesn't care about you, and you're poor. And we go through this and we go, okay, are any of these things virtues inherent to you? And you can say, well, it doesn't appear that they're virtues inherent to me. My virtues come from my actions. This is not a simple process, obviously, because it takes time and training to think yourself through these things. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with this. Oh yeah, I have some points from the discourses. If you'd permit me to read a bit, because I have some highlights here.
Sure.
Where is it? Here we go. So something interesting I found is that when I read some Stoicism, I find something that strikes me a little bit like sort of a admission of like self-interest as being a maybe just the driving force behind all action. It's sort of like a economic subjectivist notion, like this thing is valuable to me. Here's an example. All right. What about when you petition me for a favor? Isn't that proof of your regard? No, it's me looking after myself. If you press the point, I will concede that in the process I give you the same attention I give my dishes. Everything we do is done for our own ends. The upshot is that it is not antisocial to be constantly acting in one's own self-interest. We do not expect someone, after all, to be indifferent regarding himself and his welfare. It's the basis of our principle of appropriation, the instinct that drives everyone's behavior. So that's Epictetus admitting that everyone acts in their own self-interest, and it's not antisocial to do that. And like we shouldn't expect someone to be indifferent with regarding their own welfare. That's inside. That's an admission there that you should not just kill yourself, and you shouldn't just be entirely indifferent to your own welfare. You should probably take care of yourself because you have important, virtuous things to do, and also because, well, you're interested in your own life. What else? What else here? I have a different one I wanted to highlight. I think I'm going to go back through this book because I didn't start highlighting until like a third of the way through. This is just one. This is a short sentence. Well, am I implying that man is an animal unfit for action? Not at all. So that's him saying, you should probably act. There's actions that are good. You should act. Here we go. This is him BTOing the Stoics, the skeptics, him being upset with them. I think this is just funny. I think you'll just agree with you'll find this one funny. Do you realize that you are awake? No, any more than when I dream, I have the impression that I'm awake. And is the one impression in no way different from the other? No. Can I go on reasoning with such a person? Can you reason with this man? No. Oh, okay. So that's some stuff. I just brought up. You can go on now. Yeah.
Sure. So it seems like the thrust of your argument here relies on being able to sever the Stoic ethics from the metaphysics, but I think that's incoherent. The ethics is derived from the metaphysics. It doesn't stand on its own. You have to take Stoicism as Stoicism. You can't just select some nice conclusions which might be good on a different metaphysics, but are awful on the Stoic metaphysics. Like, for instance, don't get upset about things which aren't in your control. If you have an objectivist metaphysics where, you have a great deal of stuff in your control, and it's like, well, I probably, I shouldn't beat myself up too hard that this bad thing happened. I should just try and see what I can make of this situation, And I think that's perfectly fine. But when a Stoic metaphysic, what is outside your control? Everything, right? Everything is outside your control. So just, follow your duty.
That's not true.
They're determinists. So nothing's in your control.
Yeah, but no. Well, no. This is the first line of the Enchiridion. Some things are in our control and others are not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire,
Well, that'd be completely
and in a word, whatever
inconsistent.
are our own actions.
That'd be inconsistent with everything else in their metaphysics, right? Like, on what grounds could they possibly say that some things are is in man's control? So
I think on their case, what Epictetus might say about this is your place, as in like your position in the play, is something determined. Like you don't get to choose where you're born. And actually, I think there's a section in Discourses about this which I was reading. I don't think I highlighted it, but let's see. No, that's Providence. That's him talking about God. That's slaves. But essentially, the idea is, obviously, there's causality, right? So, causes precede effects, obviously, and this is part of like if as actions are taken, their effects continue forward. That's a determined fact. Like you can determine this. This is deterministic. And your place, your position, it precedes your actions, right? You're born somewhere. You are subject to circumstances that are outside your control. So that's determining your place. However, you are being part of God, having been given the faculty of reason. You get to think about what decisions you want to make, and you get to make decisions.
That's false. You can't make decisions on this view. I can explain why. right? Because you are just one part of God, and you have this universal teleology, which was common among the Greeks at this time. Everything has a purpose, God's purpose. You don't get to choose that purpose. You didn't choose that. At least not like this was before any sort of, um, you know, Austrian understanding of teleology. Like you aren't choosing these purposes. It's you are doing whatever it is that God planned for you to do. This is why they have this view that the universe goes round in cycles infinitely, everything being the same. It's rigid determinism. It's complete hardcore determinism. There is no room for humans choosing because well, a human like an eye doesn't choose to see, and a foot doesn't choose to walk. Neither does a human choose to do what he does.
Well, I would say it's obviously contradicted in the metaphysics, and well, we can say that it is the contradiction. Uh, sorry, contradicted in the ethics. Um,
I don't think it is.
but
Well, like yeah, it's contradicted when they say like because they
it's
didn't they
contradicting
weren't
the first statement in
they,
Enchiridion.
they they weren't able to deal with the problem of freedom, for instance. Like they did say some contradictory things further up the chain of deduction. Um, but like if you're to look at them and take their arguments about in metaphysics seriously, they are determinists. Like they're being inconsistent when they say things like, you know, choosing certain things. That's an inconsistency there.
Sure, I'll readily concede that. In fact, I don't really want to like. I'm not really here to defend Stoic metaphysics. Um, Now, you said that you have to take it as a whole. You can't just take Stoic ethics without taking the Stoic metaphysics. I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think Stoicism, as an early philosophy, doesn't really rely on these complete chains of reasoning. It doesn't really start with like you don't really start at the metaphysics and then eventually go deductive down, 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 eventually until you reach the dichotomy of control. Um, I think their reasoning about the dichotomy of control is valid, independent of their views on metaphysics, right? Like, it's a valid statement to say some things are in our control and others are not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, etc. You know the line. I think that you can validly deduce that independently of whether you believe um, God is real or God is not real. And in fact, it's independent of whether or not you contradict yourself in a different line of reasoning, right? Or whether they contradict themselves, right? And I could easily say that they were correct when they said this thing and incorrect when they came up with a contradictory metaphysics. Um,
But like the thing I'm trying to get across here is that the ethics is colored by what the metaphysics is. Um, you know, don't concern yourself with things out of your control. Well, that's clearly going to have uh, massive. That's going to change massively depending on what is in your control, right? And that's a metaphysical question.
sure, and I would still say again that it's not about not concerning yourself; it's about not being disturbed by things out of your control. Um,
Sure, so don't be disturbed by
and
anything
well, no, because you
because
shouldn't be
nothing's in your
disturbed.
control.
Well, no, things in your control are opinion, pursuit, desire, and aversion, right? I'm saying this is true independently of their metaphysics, right? Um, and you can act on this, like you can act on Stoic ethics. Um, uh, so, and the thing is, you would not be disturbed by anything in your control because if something in your control, your actions and opinions are uh, against the way you desire them, then you can just change it and then you wouldn't be disturbed anyway. So it's about not being disturbed at all, and the only way people are disturbed at all is when they hold uh, incorrect notions about things external to them. Um, it's difficult to hold incorrect notions about things internal to you. I guess yes. One thing would be when you neglect your internal decision making ability, because it's possible for under the Stoic description of the dichotomy of control, it's possible for you to ignore your ability to change your opinion on something or to make different decisions than you usually do, which I think you can obviously say is true. Um, so uh, that's a I'm not sure where I was going with this.
I mean, we could go into my validation that acceptance, I've termed it, is indeed a duty on Stoic grounds. So acceptance meaning
I don't think I don't think I can contest that because here's another line from Enchiridion. Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. So that's like, I think we'll both agree that that's clearly a commandment that you should like allow the universe to go on as it does, or wish that the universe will go on as it normally does, like accept the circumstances that are given.
well,
Um,
more specifically, when I'm saying acceptance, I'm meaning just accept whatever happens. Don't react to it. Doesn't matter. Don't have any passion for what you want. Don't feel anger about what state of affairs you're in. Just take everything as it comes and just yield to the universe. That's what I'm meaning by acceptance here.
well, I won't. I will contest that because there's plenty of Stoic commandments about doing things on purpose, purposefully, to be good, to be better.
And what I'm saying here is that that would be inconsistent with the fundamental premises of Stoicism. So we could go over it one at a time. So don't protest against the state of affairs you're in. Well, to protest, it would be impious. It would be a rebellion against God, since everything is part of his plan. And everything is for the best, so it's senseless to get upset when something bad happens because it's actually part of God's plan, right? If your wife dies or something, you might selfishly think that that's bad, but you're not seeing the full picture. Like it's good because it's all part of God's plan, and everything is inevitable anyway, right? Because they're determinists, so it doesn't matter. It was going to happen anyway. You couldn't change it, and then there's the whole thing about the universe is so vast with all these infinitely repeating events. What does your particular life matter? And your petty cares matter in the face of all this. So therefore, if you're going to be wise, you'll just tranquilly accept anything, right? Everything. Everything is inevitable. All's for the best anyway. Nothing external is worth having. As long as you do your duty and accept, then you have everything worth having. Just completely, always, constantly tune down your passions, because your desires and aversions are simply meaningless in the face of God's plan.
Sure, that's probably a. Let me think. That's a reasonable deduction based on the metaphysics, and in fact, it's something you can find in Enchiridion. I'll read this out. 31. Be assured that the essential property of piety towards the gods is to form right opinions concerning them, as existing, quote, I, and as governing the universe with goodness and justice, and fix yourself in this resolution, to obey them and yield to them, and willingly follow them in all events, as produced by the most perfect understanding. For thus you will never find fault with the gods, nor accuse them as neglecting you. And it is not possible for this to be effected in any other way other than by withdrawing yourself from things that are not in your own control, and placing good and evil only in things those which are. For if you suppose any of the things not in your control to be either good and evil, when you are disappointed of what you wish, or incur what you would avoid, you must necessarily find fault and blame the authors. For every animal is naturally formed to fly and abhor things that appear hurtful, and the causes of them. And it goes on for a bit, but essentially that's what you said, right? In that you should obey what's happening. You should yield to the universe. That's a version of what you said. And I'm not going to dispute there are contradictions in Stoicism. What I dispute is that in Stoicism, part of the ethics is not about being um, inactive or apathetic in the modern sense of the word. Let's see, where is it? Where is the right one I'm looking for? Here we go, 35. When you do anything from a clear judgment that it ought to be done, never shun the being seen to it. So in this case, if you're you feel that this is a correct notion, and so you should go do it, and you shouldn't conceal that this should be done. So that's part of that. Let's see. Find the what I'm looking for. I'm trying to find it. Here we go. 33. Immediately prescribe some character and form of conduct to yourself, which you may keep both alone and in company. Be silent. Be for the most part silent, or speak merely what is necessary and in few words. We may, however, enter those sparingly into discourse sometimes when the occasion falls for it, not on any of the common subjects of gladiators or horse races or athletic champions or feasts, the vulgar topics of conversation, but principally not of men, so as either to blame or praise or make comparisons. This is him just giving a bunch of advice, like avoid swearing if possible. Provide things relating to the body no further than mere use, as meat, drink, clothing, house, family, but strike off and reject everything relating to show and delicacy. As far as possible, before marriage, keep yourself pure from familiarities with women. If anyone tells you that such a person speaks ill of you, don't make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, he does not know my other faults, else he would not have mentioned only these. It is not necessary for you often to appear at public spectacles, but if ever there is a proper occasion for you to appear there, don't appear more solicitous than for anyone than for yourself. These are obviously a bunch of commandments for what's the right way to behave when you have a decision to make, right? And the implicit in the norm, the giving of a norm here is that there is a decision to make, right? If you command someone that you shouldn't laugh too much, then the implicit is that they have the ability to choose to laugh more or less.
Indeed, yeah.
Let's see.
Ought implies can, right? I would agree with that. But then on the Stoic view, there is no can. They weren't able to deal with this problem. I don't think any Stoic has ever been able to deal with the problem of freedom. But what we have at this point is there are inconsistent parts of the Stoic ethics. So one of these has to be dropped, and one of them has to be like the proper plumb line Stoicism, right? But one of them, that you accept everything and that you let it all wash over you, which is, probably more of a late Stoic view into the transition into Christianity, the more of duty ethics view, right? Less pagan. This view is consistent with the metaphysics. And then the view that, the kind of neo-Stoicism, it's like, oh, just kind of, some things aren't in your control. Just don't think that things that aren't in your control are in your control. Like, the soft Stoicism, you could call it. That is completely inconsistent with the metaphysics. Then if this neo-Stoicism is inconsistent with the core theses of Stoicism, surely that point should be dropped, rather than the point which is completely consistent and derivable from the core theses. Right? If we've got to drop one of them,
I wouldn't
drop the one which is inconsistent.
I would actually say that the metaphysics aren't necessarily the core theses of Stoicism, because if you consider how Greek philosophies formed, specifically Stoicism, they're very focused on action. Like they're very focused on ethics and like what's the right way to behave. What are things that you encounter in the world, like, and less focused on the metaphysical aspect. I think that's part of why a lot of people know a lot more about the ethics and descriptive aspects of Stoicism than they know about the metaphysics, which is buried in discourses somewhere. I think that's the ethics is developed separately, and that's why you have these inconsistencies, right? Because they probably were reasoning about these things. If you imagine this, like they were probably reasoning about these things separately, where, for instance, they would be asked for advice by a friend, and then they would think, okay, what's the right way to approach this? And they would give this advice from Stoic ethics, and then on a different day they would be thinking, okay, what should I do to be in accordance with God's plan, right? And that's a different line of reasoning for them. And I would say that the Stoic ethics contains useful information that can be applied by under a different metaphysics still, right? Like, and that's sort of my thesis here. Like that Stoic ethics and Stoic like theory on action is in like some things are in your control, others are not. You should aim the things that are in your control towards virtuous pursuits, and you should not be disturbed by things that are not in your control. I think that's something you could apply in a different metaphysical context. Especially since the Stoic metaphysical context contradicts this.
Right, but then we're just that's basically just endorsing philosophical eclecticism. Like that's collect this fun thing from this philosophy, this fun thing from this other philosophy. We aren't actually deriving anything properly. Like that seems like if that's the only way that Stoic ethics can stand, that's a poor standing. And I would say I would agree that the Stoics were more focused on ethics than on metaphysics. They basically just borrowed their metaphysics, hook, line, and stinker from other philosophers. Like that's why I call them second-rate philosophers. But that they were focused more on ethics doesn't imply that ethics has primacy. Right? I don't think even they would say that
I wouldn't
ethics
say
has
that
primacy.
it has primacy.
Right. So, but then, if, on their view, the metaphysics does indeed have primacy over the ethics. Should we not take them on their word and see what is consistent here in this view, and drop the inconsistencies?
No, we shouldn't. What I would return to this is when you say philosophical eclecticism. Well, don't you think it's useful to gain wisdom from many different places? Like, obviously, on your case, you subscribe to Misesian economics and you're anti-IP, and so obviously you don't take objectivism as Rand wrote it is in its full form. You cut away parts that are contradictory to truth, and you substitute in things that are true. So I think in this case, for Stoicism, we can cut away the parts of it which are untrue, unfit for purpose of action. And given that this reasoning can be verified independently under different metaphysics, like I don't see that there's anything that you couldn't, given this like reasoning, you could come to these conclusions through a correct metaphysics. I don't see that there's anything wrong with that.
I would say so the reason why I drop the IP from objectivism isn't because I just think, oh, let's collect from this basket and let's collect this thing from this basket and all that. I think it's just incoherent with the root of objectivism to have intellectual property recognized as an actual property right, which it just isn't, right? If so, properly understood, objectivism is opposed to these intellectual monopolies. It's against it. That Rand didn't understand this doesn't make it part of objectivism, right? Because and this is what I'm advocating we do for the Stoics. That some Stoics didn't understand the proper implications of their duty ethics doesn't make it not a part of their ethics, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm getting at here. If we're going to be consistent Stoics, and we're going to really get down deep and say, hey, these are the core premises. This is what we think the nature of the universe is. It implies a certain ethic. Then we have complete duty ethics. Of course, the actual Stoics weren't able to do this. They weren't as consistent enough. But this is nevertheless the case, that this is what you could call the Platonic form of Stoicism is. If I wanted to be cheeky.
You cheeky. Well, my argument isn't that we should be good Stoics. Like I read Stoicism not to be a Stoic, as like an ancient Stoic, but because I think there's valuable information here that can be applied in a different philosophy under a different framework, different metaphysics. And that's kind of, if we go back to the initial inciting incident behind this, is that I thought that you could synthesize some of the knowledge from Stoicism under objectivism, like objectivist metaphysics. And I think there's nothing wrong with the following line of reasoning that under objectivism you should be seeking your own happiness, right? You should be seeking to be happy and free, and and have a good life. And some of the knowledge from Stoicism regarding the dichotomy of control, I think that's a useful and consistent understanding. And when I refer to the dichotomy of control, I refer to that some things are in your control and others are not. Not that you're feeling that the Stoic metaphysics says that nothing is in your control, because obviously in the objectivist metaphysics, things are in your control, some of them at least. And so with these consistent statements, we can continue forward and get a chain of reasoning going here.
Sure, so it would be absolutely fine if the Stoics came to some proper conclusions, like, if they stumbled their way around and knocked into a good conclusion every now and then. Sure, accept that conclusion and properly ground it, properly validate it, that's fine. But what my disagreement was what Stoicism itself is actually about. I think it is actually about feeling nothing. That if we take Stoicism as Stoicism, not Stoicism as it stumbles into some correct conclusion completely inconsistent with the rest of the philosophy, then it is about apathy in the total modern sense of the word. It's about unfeeling, lack of passions, a lack of emotions. Well, not they did allow for a few emotions, but it's not exactly what we could describe as a full emotional life. It was like 3 emotions they allow you to have.
You're allowed to be happy and free.
It's
and indifferent.
You're allowed to have joy at the beauty of God as a testament to His goodness. Hope that you become virtuous, and fear that you become vicious. That's the 3 that I managed to get down. Not exactly,
You get to have 3 emotions. Anything else, banned.
Yeah.
So one thing I would contest is, so obviously in a pure truth sense, like metaphysics precedes ethics, right? But in the sense that they approach that philosophy, they approach it as an ethical exercise. They approach it as an exercise in how you ought to act. So Stoicism is more of an ethical philosophy than it is a metaphysical philosophy. And so I think it's probably best to evaluate it based on its ethics than it is to evaluate it on its metaphysics, which was, as you say, basically just like stolen from other contemporary philosophers, right?
What I'm saying is you can't evaluate a floating ethics, because the ethics has to be grounded in metaphysics and epistemology. Right?
Well, we can evaluate it from our metaphysics, can't we? Because we were under the impression that we have metaphysics, right? So we can say, okay, we'll now evaluate these ethics.
Then you're not evaluating Stoicism anymore. You're evaluating some conclusion torn from Stoicism and implemented in some other philosophy.
Well, isn't that how you interrogate any other philosophy's claims? Like, for instance, like the socialist might claim that in any exchange, there's a classical economist might claim in any exchange both items traded are of equal value, and then you, as a subjectivist in economics, you see this and you're like, no, that's incorrect, because I know that it's actually that that both parties see that the item that they're receiving is of higher value than the item that they're giving away. So both parties actually accept the trade in a higher value state. And so that's like, you're applying your own prior metaphysics to evaluate this conclusion in a different philosophical context. So I think the same thing can be applied here, is that we can evaluate Stoic claims and Stoic ethics with our own perspective here.
I think there's a difference here, though. And what I'm trying to get at is, if you have this floating ethics, then none of the ethical claims are actually complete yet. So if we have some ethics where it says, I mean, we might say this is a straw man of Stoicism, but maybe so it's not necessarily saying that
Yeah,
Stoicism believes this. It's if you say uh, never concern yourselves with things that are out of your control, that definitely depends on what do you think is in your control, right? It's not a complete claim yet.
yeah. So I think in this case, we could probably evaluate this based on what metaphysics are implied under the ethical statements, because the ethical statements imply a metaphysics. Now, whether that metaphysics is contradictory to the metaphysics they verbally profess regarding God, that's a different matter. That's a contradiction, right? So we could say this is contradictory in their philosophy. They made a mistake here. This was a mistake of them. However, we can say, well, when they're discussing ethics, they imply a certain metaphysics regarding that there is ability to choose things. And in fact, sometimes they explicitly state it, like they describe some things are in your control, others are not. So that's a contradiction. But that's when they talk about their ethics, they behave as though they have the ability to select between different actions, and so it's worth evaluating that independent of their other contradictory statements.
But then this would be impossible to reconcile what is Stoicism and what isn't Stoicism. If you have these inconsistent ethical viewpoints, and we're saying, right, what metaphysics would this ethical viewpoint require? What metaphysics would this require? And they're requiring inconsistent metaphysics, then it would be impossible to determine what is an actual Stoic conclusion and what is a mistake that some Stoics made about what is Stoicism, right?
Well, sure, because Stoicism is just a category that we're using to describe a philosophy that existed in a certain time period that was professed by certain people, and each of them have a different idea of what Stoicism is to some extent, right? This is an intersubjective thing. It's not there's no Platonic ideal of Stoicism that actually exists somewhere. To return to the cheeky phrase, like there isn't a Platonic ideal of any particular philosophy. It's a intersubjective um, classification, right?
Yeah, but like that classification is dependent on what did the Stoics believe. Then we're getting down to, okay, what is the core of their beliefs? But that is the metaphysics.
Well, they
And
had
you're
contradictory
suggesting that
beliefs.
the way we resolve this problem is to try and derive the metaphysics from the ethics. But then we would get to at least two completely inconsistent metaphysical views. So then which one is the proper
That's
Stoic metaphysical view?
There isn't one because they were contradictory, but they're both Stoic.
But then it becomes impossible
Stoic.
to evaluate the question of is Stoicism about feeling nothing?
No, it becomes possible because what we can do, we can say that there was a contradiction. So, if you were to follow the Stoic metaphysics as they stated it, then you would come to the conclusion that it is about feeling nothing. But if you were to follow the Stoic metaphysics as implied by their actions and ethics, then you would come to the conclusion that it's not. That there isn't a
No. That's not quite true. If you follow the metaphysics derived from their ethics, the metaphysics that would be required by their ethics, you aren't getting to that choice is possible. You're getting to either it's possible or it's not possible. Different ethical views of theirs would imply two different things.
yeah.
And what I'm claiming is the core of their ethics is this notion of apathy. It's this having acceptance as a duty, having altruism as a duty. This is very clearly pointing to the collectivist metaphysics that they have.
Right. Yeah, and I think you couldn't come to a single answer. It's like a quadratic equation, right? There are two answers, or there are more than one, right? This line intersects the x-axis at multiple points. Um, Although I don't know if that's a perfect analogy, because there's no contradictions when you're solving for a quadratic equation or a equation with multiple answers. Um, in this case, we're talking about what people believed, and it's possible for people to believe contradictory things. And so, if you're trying to say, well, what was their one view on this thing? They didn't have one view on this thing.
I'm not saying
They're
that
talking about multiple people.
I'm not saying that they had one view on it. I'm saying that, right, they had some inconsistent views on it. So which is coherent with the core of their philosophy? What is the core of their beliefs? Like, if you had an objectivist going around, somebody calling themselves an objectivist, who agrees with all the metaphysics and all that, and, then he came around and said that, well, in this
You
one
should blow up
particular,
children in other countries.
it's that one, but also if you said, like, oh, in this one particular circumstance, if I imagine hard enough on this particular rock that I am a bumblebee, then I will indeed turn into a bumblebee. Right? We would say, no, that's inconsistent with the objectivist viewpoint. You wouldn't say, well, some objectivists think that you can turn into a bumblebee by thinking hard enough on a rock, and some don't. You'd say, no, this guy, he is not espousing objectivism here, because this is rests on primacy of consciousness, which is a big no-no in objectivism. Very fundamental to the philosophy of
Prohibited.
objectivism is primacy of existence, right? And you wouldn't just say, well, I guess the objectivists are inconsistent on this. You'd say, right, this objectivist is inconsistent on this point, but that's because he is deviating from the proper plumb line of objectivism. Similarly, we can do this with the Stoics. We can say, hey, insofar as the Stoics were advocating for their ethics because it gets you tranquility, that is inconsistent with the core of the belief. And we can say the same thing with the Christians. Insofar as, you're saying that the world is a play by God and that you just have to do your duty because it's God's plan and whatnot, insofar as they say, and then you'll get this reward of an eternal happiness in the afterlife, that is inconsistent with the fundamental viewpoint, right? We can
Right.
say
And
this.
wouldn't
We
we
can
say
drive out what the fundamental viewpoint is, and the fundamental viewpoint
sure.
is this apathy view. It's this duty ethics.
I would ask, isn't it wouldn't we consider the more fundamental viewpoint of Stoicism to be the part of the philosophy which they focused more on, rather than the metaphysics which they borrowed from other philosophy? Right, the ethics is what they were focused on. That's the fundamental defining quality of Stoicism. Like if you took Stoicism and you didn't talk about the ethics, you'd be talking about different philosophy that's contemporary to that time. Whereas if you took Stoicism and you didn't talk about the metaphysics, then you would be talking about something that is Stoic in character. Like you're talking about Stoicism, and you're talking about the part of Stoicism which was more focused on by them. Like this is more original to Stoicism. This is more inherent to it than the metaphysics, which is borrowed from the contemporary philosophy of the time.
Well, I would give an example, an analogy rather, from Austrian economics. I would say it's almost certainly true that Austrian economists spend a great deal more of their time discussing and thinking about capital theory than they do about explaining the action axiom. Right? Could we agree on that?
Yeah, probably.
But we wouldn't then say that capital theory is therefore a more fundamental point in Austrian economics than the action axiom. Clearly, the more fundamental insight is that man acts.
Sure, but the action axiom is original to Austrian economics, isn't it? If you didn't remove the action axiom, you wouldn't get capital theory. You wouldn't be able. They wouldn't have derived any of those things.
But what I'm getting at here is that just because the Stoics spent more time thinking about and discussing ethics, it does not imply that the ethics is therefore the more fundamental point in their philosophy.
I don't think this is. I think you misunderstood what I said. It's not about that they spent more time. It's that it's the original part, right? It's the part that they derived the ethics independently of the metaphysics, right? The metaphysics they just borrowed. The ethics is what they spent their time deriving and investigating, right? This is getting into a counterfactual which we can't confirm, but they, under a different metaphysics, potentially would have derived the similar or same ethics, right? The ethics, they have derived contradictory ethics and metaphysics partly because they derived them independently.
Well, I would say I just absolutely very much doubt that they stumbled their way into a duty ethics prior to coming up with the metaphysical justification of a duty ethics. That would be an effect without cause, right? It's they get to their duty ethics because of their metaphysics.
Well, I talk more about the the dichotomy of control and like these descriptive aspects as well.
Well, that's just
which
like
are contradictory.
Epicureanism, right? So if that was the ethics that they came up with prior to the metaphysics, that would just be Epicureanism, right? But why were they
I
not
don't think
Epicureans?
it is.
It's because they weren't just retreating into their garden with their friends and stuff. You know, they didn't have these like things that they retreat to. It's retreating into your own soul, completely retreating from it, from existence as such, right? Do your duty and don't want for anything. That is the fundamental distinguishing factor between Epicureanism and Stoicism. And how do we get that distinction? It's from the metaphysics.
I don't know about that. I haven't studied the history of Epicureanism because it's much more shorter lived. But I would say there's. Where am I going with this? I have my notes. Um, you would have yeah, well, I don't think this really addresses like that the parts of Stoic ethics which derive independently from the metaphysics that contradict it. For example, like you should make good decisions, you have the ability to make decisions, you should not be disturbed by external circumstances, and but you should still do good things. Like that's contradictory to the metaphysics.
No.
But these things are.
So some of that is that you can make good decisions and stuff. Yeah, that would be contradictory to the metaphysics. But to not concern I can't remember the exact wording you used, sorry. But to not concern yourself,
disturbed.
Not to be disturbed. That's it. Yeah, so not to be disturbed with external circumstances out of control and whatnot. That would be entirely consistent with the metaphysics. But those things out of your control
I don't think so.
is everything, right? So these other points.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing.
I would say
makes sense. Yeah.
I would say these other points that you're bringing up, the Stoics didn't come up with any of that. That is borrowed from the rest, just the general pagan attitude of the time, and it's brilliant that they did bring these inconsistencies over, because then they didn't just turn into a massive suicide cult. So thank goodness for that, right? If we're going to be Platonists, of course.
I don't think this is necessary to the attitudes of the time. I think this is pretty clearly a Stoic thing. Like if you read about the early Stoics, they supposedly professed similar things regarding dichotomy of control and ethics, and this is over a multiple 100-year period. So it's not to do with their specific time; it's to do with like what's core to their ethics is focusing on your virtues that are in your control, the things that are part of your actions, doing good things, and not being disturbed by externals. Right? I think that's what you would be able to trace as the core of Stoicism, even as like the metaphysics might change around them or like develop differently.
I don't think the metaphysics changed as much as you're making it out that it did. I think it didn't change.
Well, we don't actually have any texts from the early Stoic period. So verify that.
Like I agree that there is early Stoicism, middle Stoicism, and late Stoicism, and then it got progressively more Platonist over time. I completely agree with that. But I think the fundamental core points that I'm going over here of acceptance that the world is a world soul, it's all part of the cosmic animal and all that stuff. I don't think this stuff did change all that much. Like the whole argument from design, like that preceded Stoicism. Like it very much seems to be that was in there from the beginning.
Borrowed that, yeah. Yeah, that's in here in what's this? I'm looking in discourses. Where is it? On Providence against the skeptics. No, it's later chapter. Hang on. Where is it? Ash we struggle with circumstances against Epicurus. There's a page here. There's a chapter here that's just against Epicurus. I hate Epicurus. He's like Epicurus. Like I hate him. No. Let's see. on preconceptions. How should we act towards the powerful? Where is it? Come on. Explaining the necessity of logic. Here we go. 14. That God supervises everyone. And he says, um, here we go. If plants and our bodies are so intimately linked to the world and its rhythms, wouldn't the same be true of our minds? And only more so. And if our minds are so intimately connected with God, today as divine sparks of his being, is he not going to perceive their every movement, since the parts in motion participate in his nature, etc. So, he's talking about God supervises everyone. Oh, that's different though. That's just more like God is watching you. Where is this? Where's the one where he talks about the argument from design?
Well,
It's in here somewhere.
I think we can agree that they are definitely accepting the argument from design. And what I'm saying is their metaphysics is built upon, or at least in tandem with, this argument from design. Everything is so orderly because God orders it. And they accepted that given it's orderly, therefore determinism, which was the common mechanistic, atomistic view of the time, right? Either you have Heraclitean chaos or rigid determinism. Of course, Aristotle was able to escape this, but the lesser philosophers weren't able to. But given you have this argument from design, God ordering everything, that means you have this universal teleology, which means, do your duty. It's your duty ordained by God. And we get to this whole Stoic metaphysics that I've been going over. So if they have been accepting the argument from design from the beginning, why wouldn't they be accepting the metaphysics that it implies?
Well, let me can I ask this: if you see a person and he says, "The world is ordered by God, everything is preordained, this is full determinism," yet he acts as though he has ability to make decisions and do good things, which one does he actually believe?
I would say his professed beliefs, his explicit beliefs, are incoherent with what he actually has to do. So this is someone like David Hume is a good example of this, where it's said that he would be writing some philosophy all day, he'd go out drinking with his friends, and he'd come back and he'd be appalled by what he was writing, because it's like, what the hell, I've been dropping this the whole night,
No!
Because it's like, you have, that's why, these guys aren't necessarily as bad as Hume, but they are worse than the savage who just, doesn't even explicitly reject anything. So these guys are these guys are explicitly rejecting that which they depend upon. So the Stoic who is explicitly saying that man has no choice, and then implicitly relying on the fact that he can choose things. It's like a stolen concept almost.
Yeah, sure, it's a stolen concept. But I would ask that if the part of their philosophy, the ethics, which is what they spent most of their time designing, is reliant on these implicit metaphysics, which contradict their explicit metaphysics, wouldn't it be more correct to say that the implicit metaphysics is more apt for evaluating the philosophy than the explicit metaphysics?
But then you're going to have every single philosophy being, well, we really have to just throw out their metaphysics and evaluate it on objectivist ground, because implicitly everybody has to act on the objectivist presumptions, but then you're never going to be able to evaluate the metaphysics.
Well, you could evaluate the metaphysics independently. Like, you could be like, well, obviously these metaphysics are incorrect. This is just like we can evaluate this on its own grounds. And I think being able to evaluate these things separately is useful, right? Like, because not everything everyone says is coherent, but not everything everyone says is all incorrect, right? They could say like 3 incoherent things, and then 2 coherent things, and then 2 more incoherent things, and then you'd be like, okay, I can explode all the incoherent statements, and I can still integrate the coherent statement.
But these coherent Stoic points that you're bringing up, they are only pagan carryovers, because they weren't able to be completely consistent in their view. And how do I know that this is an inconsistency with the core view? Because we know the core view. They told us the core view in their metaphysics.
Well, I would ask, how do you know it's a pagan carryover? How do you, like isn't
Because
I'm under the
basically
impression that
all the pagans, none of them were able to achieve complete duty, complete anti-life, because they were still a reasonably rational society. It isn't until Kant or perhaps Christendom that you throw out reason completely, right? It's in the age of Greece, people still respected reason to some degree. Like the Stoics were saying, live in accordance with your nature, and your reason will tell you what that means, you know. So they still at least respected reason somewhat. Um, so they weren't able to be completely consistent in their views.
well, but I mean more like um, descriptive statements about like some things are in your control, others are not, or men are disturbed not by things, but the principles and notions they hold concerning things. These sort of things, which come through even like in modern times when we do cognitive behavioral therapies, like um, by like exploding incorrect notions that people have about their lives to make them happier. Like, isn't that uh, a stoic derivation?
Um, I mean, it doesn't. It's not the core point of Stoicism. That's what I was in the initial disagreement. I was talking about the core of Stoicism. What does that
But this is what
give
everyone
you?
stoicism. This is what everyone learns stoicism for. It's what stoicism is famous for. It's. I would say this is the
Sure,
essential
because it's
characteristic of stoicism. If you if
watered
you
down.
if you took this out of stoicism, you would have like you would have a fundamentally different. Like you wouldn't be describing stoicism as it's known, and just subjectively or like as anyone would be able to identify it. It wouldn't be stoicism. Like even the common noun stoicism, which is it's more uh, uh, similar to apathy in the modern sense, right? But even that core, like that common noun, which describes someone who is like free of emotion, that is derived from a misunderstanding of the ethics, right? Like that's something you would be able to like
But I don't think it is
if you
a
remove the
misunderstanding of the ethics, though.
no.
Yeah, because if we take the ethics as we can derive it from the metaphysics, then it's completely consistent to say that a Stoic is someone who is apathetic.
Hmm, I don't know. I think it's important to like. I think it's necessary to consider what is the essentially understood quality of this. Like the metaphysics, like as you've said, is something that they borrowed. Like they took the metaphysics from contemporary other philosophers by reading other philosophers from from other contemporaries and predecessors. But the ethics is something that they came up on their own. So that's something that's essentially Stoic.
I don't
That's
think
not borrowed.
so. So the ethics, the unique points in their ethics, were derived from the metaphysics, like the duty ethics. They're the first influential form of duty ethics. Um, the inconsistencies, they were not unique to the Stoics at all. They're like carried over from
Where does
Epicureanism.
the dichotomy of control come from? If not Stoicism, like the way they described it, and the theory about of on Stoic exercises about disturbance and disruption.
Well, I would say you can derive that from their metaphysics, and insofar as that is a unique point, derived from their metaphysics, um, it's bolstering my view here. It's a duty ethics.
No, because these are so a lot of these are descriptive. Well, I guess not. It wouldn't be an ethic if it's descriptive.
Well,
Um,
we should be clear. Like the ancient
so
Greeks
like
didn't have like an is-ought gap or anything like that, so they didn't have some
that's
hard
true.
line between descriptive and prescriptive.
This is a line that I'm drawing when I read it. I'm like, this is okay. This is they're talking about the dichotomy of control and describing how it is, like how and like for instance, uh, what would I use as an example? Um, I think the dichotomy of control is a good example here. Like So this is something that we've identified as obviously contradictory to their metaphysics, right? Like you believe that the metaphysics would imply that there is nothing in your control, but the Stoic ethical presupposition is that some things are in your control and others are not. You're in control of your actions. You're not in control of things in the world in general, um, like physical things in the world. And so, like this as a presupposition that leading to other things like, well, if you're only in control of your own actions, you can only be responsible for them, and they're the only things that can be good or bad about you, right? Like you could not be evil because something is wrong with your body, because your body is part of the world. It's not in your control, so you couldn't be held responsible for it. You can only be held responsible for your actions, right? And only your actions can be virtuous or vicious. I don't think like any of that. I think that's a pretty stoic approach.
Maybe Stoicism as warped through 2 millennia, right? But not Stoicism as Stoicism.
No, this is what I read from Enchiridion. Hey, let me read Enchiridion for a bit. Um, let's see. Sickness is a hindrance to the body, but not your ability to choose, unless that is your choice. Lameness is a hindrance to the leg, but not your ability to choose. Say this to yourself with regard to everything that happens, then you will see such obstacles as hindrances to something else, but not yourself. So they're saying, well, if something hinders your body, you still have the ability to choose. You still have the ability to think. You can still act. You still have. There are still things about you. You get to still be good or bad, right? That's saying that. Um,
Well, you. This is a point I've been wanting to bring up.
yeah.
That you still get to be good or bad. We are kind of brushing over what it means to be good or bad. What I'm saying is to be good means to just roll back and accept God's plan. To be bad is to try and fight God's plan, which of course you can't do because they weren't able to reconcile the problem of freedom. Um, yeah, so you have in your control to be good or bad. You have in your control to fight God's plan, to be impious, or to just let it all happen, right? If it feels like you're assuming a different sense of good and bad than what it appears the Stoics are saying is good and bad.
Well, would you say, what do you know about the Stoic virtues and vices, like courage, wisdom, justice, temperance, and then versus the vices being cowardice, intemperance, stupidity, and what's the word I'm looking for? Rampancy. Oh, no, that's intemperance. Which one did I forget? Injustice. That's the one. Like, what do you know about the Stoic virtues that they profess? Like these,
I mean, they sound
you
kind of
know.
similar to the Platonist ones, um, or just the general Greek ones. But I don't know specifically what they mean by each of those terms.
Yeah, well, let me find it. There's a book about this that I saw. Let me see. I'll find it. Where is it? But basically, they described what they meant by these things, like being courageous. Um,
Can you hold
is
that thought whilst you look that up? I'm going to go to the bathroom.
sure, I'll find it.
All right. RB. I hath returned.
Here we go. Let me see. You should just read this so I can summarize it. Um, Here we go. Here we go. However austere we may find Stoicism, it remains a eudaimonistic philosophy. As in all of the other ancient philosophical schools, the goal of human life for the Stoics is happiness, Macaria, or eudaimonia. This goal, as uh, eudaimonia is what every human being desires. If it is the ultimate, if often unformulated goal of all our various particular pursuits, it will be the complete good for us as humans. So the addition of other things could not improve it. It will ideally involve a person's whole life. Where's the part on virtues? Stoic exclusivity. Virtue is the only good. Where do they talk about courage in this one? Where is it? I gotta find it because this just talks about courage. Here we go. The Stoic virtues of virtues. Yeah. Okay, this is a whole paper. I'm probably not gonna find it, and I can't even control F because it's a scan. But okay, so my point here being they have virtues that they discuss that you would probably say is contradictory to their metaphysics. Like the idea that you should be courageous kind of implies that you should change your character from being non-courageous to courageous. But if your character was determined by God, then if God determines that you should be non-courageous, then you should probably be non-courageous, which is a contradiction. So if they're saying that you should be a courageous person and a wise person to gain wisdom, then wouldn't you like wouldn't that imply something? And isn't that like a internally like stoic virtue?
I'm confused by the question.
So what we were discussing before is like, is the core of Stoicism the ethics and the implied metaphysics behind the ethics, or is it the contradictory metaphysics, which is more borrowed from contemporaries and like incorrect and contradictory to the ethics? Like, which one of these is the core? And I'm arguing that, well, the core is the thing they focus on more, and it has more of their original thought. Like, it is more essentially stoic than any of the other things that were part of their philosophy. Like, this is something that you wouldn't get, that you wouldn't find
Well,
somewhere else.
I think
And so
the
what I'm
really,
trying to say is because you have,
I think the really unique thing in the Stoic ethics is that it's the first influential duty ethics. Right? It's that is the unique thing about it, and that is plumb line derived from the metaphysics, which is core, right?
it's
The
interesting that you
other,
call it a
the other,
duty ethic.
yeah.
Because most of the sources I see and a lot of the like reading about stoicism, it's called a virtue ethics. Like they talk about you should be courageous, so you should take actions to cultivate courage in yourself, right? Or wisdom, right? You should seek out knowledge, practical knowledge about the world. You should cultivate reason, right? These are all virtues. They're not necessarily like duties. Like you should just follow the commands of God. Well, it might necessarily be that the command of God is that you should be virtuous. Um, I think
But
that's probably
it seems
the
like
short way of thinking.
it seems to me that these Stoic virtues are basically just borrowed from the general Greek attitudes of the time, like nobility and stuff like that. You know, you should seek out the virtues. This just seems very like copy and paste from Socrates here. So that doesn't feel like
Yeah,
a
I mean,
unique point.
everyone revered Socrates.
So it seems like the unique
Um,
point is the duty ethics, which is what is consistent
well,
with their metaphysics.
I would say the unique point is probably to do more with the action theory and like the theory behind how you should like how you should handle
Is there theory?
impressions and disturbances.
Is there theory of action, not just basically the atomistic one, though?
You would have to elaborate what the atomistic theory of action.
So, like, action A causes action B, billiard balls, yada yada yada. I suppose it's more teleological than that.
Well, no, I would
Everything
say the
is
action theory
pointing
as part of their
towards
ethics, like
whatever God
the
points them
action theory
towards.
being the action theory being that you have the ability to control your actions and not things outside of that, right? That's like the action theory. When you read about Stoic ethics, right, they talk about, well, you have ability to make decisions, don't you? Well, then make good decisions, dumbass.
I really don't see how they could possibly account for any sort of ability to choose
They
which
don't.
action.
They generally assume it, right? Like they assume it when they talk about their ethics. You said that they fail to account for the problem of freedom, right? They couldn't account for it in their metaphysics. Well, they didn't. They were contradictory. But I'm saying that in their ethics, they assumed this correct statement that you do have control over your actions, and then from there they reasoned other correct statements, even if in their metaphysics they accidentally stumbled into the incorrect idea that they don't have control, like because God is in control.
I don't think it's that they stumbled into the metaphysical point. They stumbled into any sort of good ethic that they made. That's the
Sure,
point
but
of
I'm saying that
stumbling.
this ethic is the more essential part because the metaphysics is something that they borrowed. You
Well,
said
these
this.
ethics are what they borrowed. And they're
Well, no,
second-rate
they didn't borrow
philosophers. They
the
borrowed basically
dichotomy of
everything.
control and such. I wouldn't know. I haven't read enough about
like
their contemporaries, to be honest.
The unique point is the duty ethics, not virtue ethics. They weren't the first ones to come up with that.
Sure, but I'm talking. So you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the dichotomy of control?
So that there are some things in your control and some things out of your control.
Yeah, and they're talking about the theory on how to avoid being disturbed.
Right, but how do we get to how you should be avoid being disturbed, and that you're disturbed by things out of your control? Well, that's all coming from the metaphysics.
Well, no, it comes from the dichotomy of control that was stated right there. Like, if there are
Right,
things that
yeah,
are not
but
in
how do you
control,
get
right?
to the dichotomy of control in the first place? How do they get to this as like an
Well, obviously
important
not by the
ethical
metaphysics,
question?
because by your interpretation of the metaphysics, you wouldn't get the dichotomy of control. You would get nothing is in your control.
Yeah, so like maybe it wouldn't be a dichotomy then. It would just be, hey, either you can control this thing or you can't. You can't. Whoops. So don't bother. It would be an
Sure,
inconsistency that they might think, oh, well, what if you could control it? That would be an inconsistent point. That's how you get to the
sure, that's an
dichotomy.
inconsistent point. But the what I'm trying to argue, like, is that the core of it, the more important aspect, is that in the aspect of the philosophy that they spent most their own developments, right? The ethics, which we agree, like they spent most of their time developing the ethics, and it's the more essential. I'm just saying, arguing this is the more essential Stoic like teaching. Like you wouldn't be able to identify this as Stoicism without the ethics. They assumed that people had control of things, their actions.
Like I just don't understand how on earth this could possibly be the fundamental point. How could that be the fundamental point if it's not even in the domain of the fundamental points of philosophy, which is metaphysics?
I think this might let's do. I think this might be a disagreement over what we think is fundamental in this context. Like when I'm saying fundamental to Stoicism, as in it's what's necessary to identify it, right? Like it's you would be able to you wouldn't be able to identify Stoicism just from um the godly metaphysics, right? The metaphysics about like God is in control of everything, and um the argument from design, right? You wouldn't be able to identify something as Stoicism because it makes the argument from design. Lots of people make that argument. You would be able to identify Stoicism from these ethics which contradict the metaphysics. So this is more essentially Stoicism than those metaphysics are. And because it is, then I think it's right to evaluate it based on the ethics.
So, like, if something is fundamental in philosophy, it means that it's like a antecedent point. So it's like, we say that fundamentally in objectivism, you'd have existence exists, the law of identity, and consciousness. That would be the fundamental parts. What wouldn't be fundamental is that selfishness is a virtue. It may be the case that more time has been spent on selfishness being a virtue. Right, yeah, it's a derivation from it. It's not the fundamental point. Similarly with Stoicism, it's not the fundamental point of, like, don't be disturbed by things out of your control. That isn't the fundamental point. The fundamental point is the metaphysics.
Sure, I guess when you take that as the fundamentals, because it's like axioms, like Austrian axioms, like these are the fundaments, and then capital theory is not fundamental, but it's the derivation, and but it's very important. So I think in this case, what I would say is it's worth evaluating Stoicism on what's essential to Stoicism rather than what you might say is fundamental. But I would say, like, and I think we both agree that the metaphysics are contradictory to the ethics as described here.
Well, not the proper ethics. That's what I'm saying.
Well, the proper ethics aren't what they profess, so it's not
well,
like
they did profess
Stoic,
it, though.
Right?
Like, so I've got two of the duties written down here: acceptance and altruism. Altruism, I've got paragraphs and paragraphs of Epictetus talking about altruism. They were definitely professing these ethics that I'm saying, this duty ethics. They definitely profess that at length.
Where's my page? Where is it? What does philosophy profess? Hang on. Find the page I'm looking for. How can a man preserve his proper character upon every occasion? Let's see. Try to find it. No, can't find it. What's the text on? Here we go. From its inception, Stoic virtue ethics distinguished itself from Peripateic forebearers, just as it differentiated its claims from the cynical, Epicurean, academic, and skeptical traditions. Many of its central commitments, including to the exclusive beneficence of virtue, seem alien to the more urbane moderation of Aristotle's more typically inclusive positions. Stoic claims that external goods are fundamentally indifferent to a good human life. Where is this? I'm looking for.
You just had an interesting point there. That external goods are indifferent to human life. Right, so just don't care about external things. Right, so that's
well, the actual position is that you can have preferences regarding external goods, right? You can say, I would prefer to have, a house rather than not having it, right?
Sure, but like,
the idea is that nothing about having a house confers any virtue upon you, right?
Well, yeah, but like that's the thing. Like
that is moral about a house.
These material things are not values. You might prefer it, but tough titties. You'll get what you get. It's not about pursuing any sort of external things. Money's worthless to you. It's not a value. Houses are worthless. They're not a value. None of these signs of success are actually a value. Just take your lot in life and deal with it.
Actually, hang on. Oh, there's a good page about this. Where is it? There's a good section on this in discourses, because basically, here it is. How many man possesses this character of progress? Here it is, of progress. Where is his? Wait, here we go. So the whole point, the whole point of the existence of externals, right? You act upon the world, right? You still exist in the world. You have actions. You have your body. You act using your body. You take actions, right? And action it is virtuous or vicious. Like you can have virtuous or vicious actions. So when you act, you need to act on externals, but you are not necessarily you are doing it because the action is good, not because the result on the externals is
Yeah, it's
necessarily
duty
what's the good
ethics.
thing, right? It's a virtue. It's a virtue. No, we're talking about virtue ethics.
You said you do it
Being courageous is good.
because the action itself is good. So it's about the action itself.
Yeah,
It's not about the effects it
well,
has.
the action is good because it's virtuous, right?
It's
Courageous
virtuous
to do this
because
thing.
it's in line with duty.
Yeah, I mean, your duty to God to be courageous under this view. It's probably where they think it comes from. I don't know necessarily that's essential to it though. I think they all believe that everything came from God. That's like I don't think you could find a philosopher. I don't think you could find atheists around that time.
Well, I mean, Aristotle is not exactly what we would call massively religious. I think there's a story told where he had like his immovable mover, and that accounted for the action in the world. Everything was just trying to follow that. And then the astronomers came to him and they're like, you know what, we actually think there needs to be 52 components of action to account for all of the movements of the stars. And he was like, well, I guess there's 52 gods. Like, he's not really married to any sort of
Real,
concept of
real.
like if you told that to Plato, you would tear your fucking eyes out. You'd be like, no, there's one form of the
52
good.
gods spotted.
Like, like he's not like massively into like any sort of particular religion. Um, but yeah, so on the Stoic view, I think it is definitely fundamental that we have this acceptance. And I mean, even in the text you're going over here, it's that, well, external things are irrelevant. Don't want for things. Just do your
I
duty.
would say they're irrelevant. They're indifferent, which is different.
How
It's
is that different? Be indifferent
it's
to
different.
things because they're irrelevant, right?
No, the idea is they are not they're not essential to your character, right? And your character is you should be good, right? And so if these things are not essential to that, then
Right. What does it mean to be
you
good?
could act
Does
on
it
any
mean
different
to
thing.
have great effects? To get great things? To achieve the good life? Is that what it means to be good?
Well, no,
Yeah,
virtue
no.
is the only good.
And what is virtue? It's living with duty. It's being in line with duty. It's following your duty.
Well, there are four Stoic virtues. The Stoic virtues are courage, like wisdom, temperance, and justice. And so in that case, I read this. So courage is about um, developing your your ability to choose these things, right? Like if you're it's similar to temperance. There's a lot of overlap because these are not very axiomatic concepts. Um, it's easier to when you look at wisdom and justice because wisdom in their understanding is well like knowledge, like develop your understanding of the world, develop your reasoning. That's like knowing things is good because it helps you determine what the right course of action is. Um, and justice is obviously good in and of itself because it's well give what is deserved, which is like well you ought to give what you ought to give people, or you ought to do what you ought to do. Uh, like that's a tautology on its own, because the goodness of it is contained in itself, and
Yeah, and so
courage is good.
on that point of you ought to do what you ought to do, um, we can break down what is it that you actually ought to do. Well, it's the teleology, right? They have this universal metaphysical teleology view. It's all about God's plan. Follow God's plan. That's what you ought to do. So that would be the virtue of justice right there. It's duty ethic.
Sure, but everyone believe that. So we're going back to like what's the core? The core of Stoicism has more to do with the dichotomy of control and their unique
I
contributions.
don't think everybody did have a duty ethic back. I think the Stoics are the first form of this duty ethic. Like previously, it's like we can take Aristotle as the easy counterexample here. It's about living by your nature such that you achieve the good life. It's all about trying to get to the good life. It's about what will make you happy and successful on this world. It's not about doing your duty because it's your duty, and you might be a foot and have to be sacrificed for the whole. That's very distinct.
I don't know enough about their contemporaries to investigate that. But as far as I know, the Stoic ethic is more to do with like here we go. Let me read this. Here we go. This is part of Enchiridion. The things in our nature are by nature the things in our control are by nature free, unrestrained, unhindered. But those not in our control are weak, slavish, and restrained, belonging to others. Remember then that if you suppose the things that are slavish by nature are also free, and that what belongs to others is your own, then you'll be hindered, you will lament, you'll be disturbed, you will find fault with both gods and men. But if you suppose that only to be your own, that which is your own, what belongs to others, such as it really is, then no one will ever compel you or restrain you. Further, you will find fault with no one and accuse no one. You will do nothing against your will. No one will hurt you. You will have no enemies, and you will not be harmed. Aiming therefore at such great things, remember that you must not allow yourself to be carried, even with a slight tendency towards attainment of lesser things. Instead, you must entirely quit some things for the present and postpone the rest. But if you would have both these great things, along with power and riches, then you will not even gain the latter, because you aim at the former too. But you will absolutely aim at the former, by which alone happiness and freedom are achieved, right? And so that kind of implies that the whole goal of the operation is to gain happiness and freedom.
Right, but I feel like we're going in circles here. But I'll just say, like, yeah, that would be
Well,
insofar
I
as
think
they're
we're going
saying
in
this.
circles probably because the Stoics were going in circles too.
Yeah, we could cap this off here then if we're not going to get down to the root. If you're unless you have something else to go over.
No, I think. Let me check. I have something in my. No, I think I covered all my points.
Cool. I suppose I'll see you when I see you. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no worries. See you around.
Guten Tag.